welcome to the Mental Health Misconceptions workshop led by Susanna. She's joining us all the way from Michigan, so we're really excited to have her here with us, especially since the theme of our hackathon is mental health, so you can see there's a direct link. So you can use all the knowledge she provides you in this workshop within your own projects. And if you have any specific questions with your projects, please leave it till the end of the workshop. But if you have any questions as we go along with all of whatever she talks about, feel free to comment in the chat. We're gonna have a lot of polls, so please stay active during the workshop. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Susanna now.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. I am really excited to be hosting this workshop on mental health. I have a very fancy looking PowerPoint planned out for y'all, so I'll share that in a minute. But before I do, like Kamal said, if you have any questions, please just, hold off at least until the end of each section before asking. That way we can make sure that I don't cover them later on in the section. This is divided up a little bit, so half of it is on really common misconceptions about mental health and mental illness, and the other half is about coronavirus's impact on mental health as a general rule and kind of what we can do to improve our overall mental health and make sure that we're staying mentally healthy in this very difficult time. So feel free to ask questions in the chat or raise your hand, whatever way you want to do it, and we can go ahead and get started. I know how to do this. There we go, perfect. So, let me get my little notes pulled up and we can go ahead. Oh, one moment, sorry guys. My notes do not want to pop up for whatever reason, but I think I know the way to override it. Maybe not. Spent all this time getting everything together, and of course the minute I want to, there, that, share screen. All right, we'll do it like that. There we go. Okay, sorry about that, y'all. Minor technical difficulties. Okay, so welcome everyone to this group on mental health. I'm really excited to see everyone who's come and to run this group. Before we dive in, I thought that it would be kind of a good idea for me to share a little bit of my experience in mental health and introduce who I am. So my name is Susanna, as Kamal said. I actually first started out as a lead imagery mentor for FRC 2832. I was the lead mentor there for 4 years. I worked primarily with PR and awareness campaigns and fundraising, and I loved it. And that's how I first heard about Spark and this event, was through some of the different First Robotics Facebook groups that I'm a member of. While I was an imagery mentor, I was also getting my bachelor's in psychology from Oakland University. And while I was getting my bachelor's in psych from Oakland, I was also studying pro-social and moral development in teenagers. So pro-social development is essentially like positive behavior. So making sure that people are interacting positively with each other. And then obviously moral development is that developing your inner morality. And I actually was part of an international study. We looked at how parents talked to their children about different pro-social and moral issues like bullying, volunteerism, stuff like that, and kind of use those to talk about how important it was for parents to teach their kids about morals and to teach their kids about moral or pro-social behavior. So during my last year getting my psych degree, I started working at a psychiatric hospital, and I worked there for over 5 years. Most of my experience in the psych hospital was on our child and adolescent units. There we were licensed for kids as young as 4 years old up to the age of 18. So we had a huge age range. And as some of you may have heard earlier, we were licensed for up to 54 beds, meaning that we could have up to 54 patients on this unit at one time. So it was a lot of patients. When I started, I was just a tech, and by the end of my stay there, I was a preceptor. So I was in charge of like supervising and training all of the direct care staff that came in and worked with these different patients. So currently I am the program outcomes coordinator at a nonprofit that is almost 100 years old. We've got a ton of different programs and services within the community, and all of these programs and services are designed to improve and educate people about mental health and its importance. So I've got a pretty extensive and varied background in mental health, and when I was asked if I'd be willing to run this work group, I was very, very excited because this is all the stuff that I love to talk about. And I do talk fast, so apologies in advance. I'm gonna try to keep it quick, or keep it, not legible, that's for words, but keep it easy to understand. If you need me to slow down, please just say so. So why does this workshop matter? I wanted to touch really briefly on why this matters, both in the context of this weekend and also in your life moving forward. I should hope by now that many of you have started working on your projects and presentations and have a pretty good idea of what you're doing with them, and that this workshop will just spur you on to complete your goals. But after this weekend is over, your concept of mental health still matters. Because mental health is a part of everything you do, everything. It's not just about mental illness. We all have brains, therefore we all need to be aware of our mental health. Your brain pilots the rest of your body. If your brain is not healthy or balanced, the rest of your body is going to struggle to function. And understanding what mental illness looks like and what can affect our overall mental health can help us take better care of ourselves, and it can also help us make a more positive impact on this community, which is pretty dang important. So, as you guys have guessed by the title, we're going to be talking about different misconceptions about mental health and mental illness, as well as the effect of COVID-19 on mental health. There's going to be plenty of time at the end for me to answer any questions that you have. And like Kamal said, I've got lots of little polls set up throughout that will hopefully help keep everybody engaged and just kind of aware and on topic. So let's get started. So I thought that I would start this section of misconceptions off by talking about psych hospitals. I found them, I think they're fascinating because I worked in one, but I think that a lot of people find them fascinating. You know, there's a lot of different portrayals of them throughout the world, and especially on different types of media. But I think, well, actually, I know a lot of those are really, really vastly inaccurate, shall we say. So for my first poll, I want you guys all to take a look at these three different buildings that I've got going on here. And it looks like I might have to share my screen to get the poll, or stop my screen share to get the poll up. Oh, nope, never mind, it's right up here, cool. So my first poll is just simply take a look at those three buildings and take a guess at which one is the psych hospital. I will give you guys like maybe 30 seconds to take a guess. So go ahead and take your best stab at it, and then I will tell you if you're right. All right, looks like almost everybody has voted. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the polling in 3, 2, 1, end. All right, we're gonna go ahead and share those results with you all. So it looks like most of you guys thought C was the psychiatric hospital, and then some of you guys thought A, and then nobody thought B. So this is a little bit of a trick question, but not on purpose. Letter A is the psych hospital. You are correct. This is actually the hospital that I worked at. This is one of our newer wings that was added a few years before I started. B is a medical hospital that is about 5 miles away from the psych hospital. Actually, they do have a psychiatric floor, but the whole hospital is not dedicated just to psych. And then C are some senior living apartments that are right down the street from where I live. So when we're thinking about psych hospitals, I think a lot of people that watch a lot of movies have a tendency to envision them as something like B, right? These big, imposing, scary looking, vaguely haunted buildings. There actually is one by where I used to grow up that is closed down now, but it is an old psych hospital that looked just like this. And my grandmother actually worked there. She taught GEDs to patients there, which is crazy to me. But for the most part, psych hospitals look like just every other hospital. They're not going to look scary and imposing from the outside, and they don't look scary and imposing inside either, which is what I'm going to show you guys next, because I actually was able to find some pictures of the inside of the hospital I used to work at. So this is our kind of like the main entryway here for one of the units. You can see right here is what we call the nurse's desk. This is where staff sit when they're not doing rounds on patients or helping patients through things. If there's really nothing else that they need to do, which actually is pretty rare, we're pretty busy all the time. This is where they sit, so that way if patients need anything, they can come and find us. Through this door back here is what we call the conference room. We would have 30 minutes at the beginning of each shift to get updates on our patients, on what they were going through, on whether or not anyone was going to be discharged or admitted, and what their issues were, what time they were going to be discharged. This door right here, although it is shut, is actually left unlocked. It's just a fire door, so it's kept closed for safety. So patients can cross between the two different parts of the unit as they wish. These rooms right here are what are called day rooms. These are rooms that have TVs, games, books, different activities for people to do so they're not bored all the time. These rooms are also where we would hold different groups relating to mental health. And then over off to the right, as well as to the left, because this unit is shaped like a big T, are the bedrooms. And it looks almost like a hotel. There's a hallway, there's a bunch of doors, and each door leads to a bedroom. And they are kept separate from the day rooms, just so people are kind of used to, going to sleep in one place and going to do stuff in another place. This is the cafeteria where our units would come and eat. We have 8 different units with different amounts of patients, and those units would all rotate through the cafeterias for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So patients that were on one unit did not intermingle with patients from another unit. That was just kind of for safety as well as for HIPAA purposes. The food wasn't bad. It was hospital food. We ate it as staff. Obviously, patients ate it. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. We have better chairs now, too. These old things are out of there. And off to the right here, just outside of the range of the picture, we actually had a piano. And patients who could play the piano would be welcome to come and play. So occasionally we would have music going while we were eating dinner, which was really nice. We have a lot of windows to the outside world in here. And most of the units also did have private courtyards, so people were able to go outside. They weren't locked in their rooms or in the units for the entirety of their stay. And the last picture is of one of the bedrooms. I found these pictures online. I did not take them because when I was working there, it was full of patients, so I couldn't take them. But I was a little sad because this is the only good picture of a bedroom that I could find. And most of our bedrooms only had 2 beds, not 3. So this is a little bit of an anomaly. And obviously when we got patients in, we had blankets and sheets and all that, so these beds would be made. These cubbies were for everyone to keep their clothes in. There was a desk, so if they wanted to work in their rooms, they'd be welcome to. And then each room on this unit has a private bathroom with their own shower as well. These rooms on adult units were left open throughout the day, so that way patients could kind of come and go in and out of their rooms as they pleased. And the adult units had a lot less structure than the unit I worked on, the child adolescent unit. The child adolescent unit, every patient was assigned to specific groups, and they did need to stay with their groups throughout the day. So the kids units had a lot more structure and probably felt a little bit more like a school with different activities having a scheduled at the same time every day. Not pictured, we also did have a gym, like I said, outdoor courtyards, and then the different day rooms were just basic, almost like living room situations. They were large, plenty of tables and chairs for people to hang out with if they wished. It's just kind of like the inside of a psych hospital. I wanted to include those because it drives me crazy a lot when I see depictions of them in different movies and TV, and they're never accurate. There's a ton of reasons why they're not accurate. I won't get too much into that, because if I do, I won't stop. But all of our rooms, regardless of where they are designed with the safety of patients in mind, meaning that it's very difficult to find a way to harm yourself or harm others. You can see like everything here is really smooth. It's hard to grip anything or break anything. It's designed to be sturdy and to last and to keep everyone safe. So moving on to the next section is just who is staying in a psychiatric hospital. And that is going to be the second poll. Poll number 2. I'm going to launch it. There's just 2 questions, so it shouldn't take you guys too long to do. Give you all a few seconds to vote here. They're just true or false, and please don't Google. Please just kind of go with your instinct. That's the whole point of this. All right, looks like most people have voted, so I'll go ahead and end it, and I'll share the results. So if you guys can see, for number 1, most patients in psych hospitals are really dangerous / crazy. Congratulations, you guys are all correct. I've, like I said, worked in psych a long time. Most of the people that come there are not dangerous or crazy. In fact, I wouldn't even use the word crazy in conjunction with like anything mental health related. I think it's one of those words that really needs to be removed from that setting as a whole. When I did work with patients who were psychotic, and we did get a good amount of them, even their psychosis, their version of reality, had some version of it that was maybe not logical per se, but at least next door to logic. It kind of made sense. So, stupid PowerPoint doesn't want to go next. 1 second. So the majority of people that are admitted to a psych hospital are suicidal, meaning that they only want to hurt themselves. They don't want to hurt anybody else. In fact, like I said, majority, so I think probably like 80%, if not 90% of our patients were suicidal. We did have some that were homicidal, meaning they wanted to hurt other people. And we did have some that were psychotic, meaning that they wanted to, or did not want to, that their version of reality was not correct. They were not grounded in reality at all. But for the most part, they were people that were struggling with thoughts of self-harm or feelings of suicide, or who had attempted suicide and been transferred into the psych hospital from an emergency room. The next myth, looks like you guys, for the most part, were again correct, which is great. I'm actually really encouraged to see that, because I feel like this, like the younger generation, which I want to believe I'm a part of, even though I'm probably not, you guys, I think, have a lot more awareness about the realities of mental health than people of older generations have. And so it's really good to see that you guys are right on these polls. So this myth that once you're admitted to a psych hospital, you're going to be there for a long time, that is not true, thank goodness. Instead, for the most part, people stayed for about a week. I worked at what is called inpatient psychiatric, and it is considered to be acute care, meaning these are people that are an active threat to themselves or to others. Once they are no longer an active threat, they are discharged and they are set up with treatment and therapy in the community instead, so that way they're able to go home and be at home while still continuing to get the help that they needed. Now, we do have residential treatment centers, which I actually did start out working on, was one of our residential facilities. And those are for people with constant reoccurring issues. It is actually really hard to get admitted to a residential facility. You need to have a lot of proof that conventional treatments are not working, that medication is not working, you know, that you've been in and out of inpatient multiple times and nothing is making a difference. So you do need that long-term care. Once you're in that long-term care, the way it looks is completely different than the way it looks in inpatient. It feels more like a home, like a family. The staff there get to know the patients really, really, really well. You really get a lot more one-on-one, very personalized services and treatments, because the beds, the amount of patients are admitted there are a lot fewer. And so you're able to get a lot more specialized services, but you are in there for a long time. The different residential facilities we transferred kids to, the shortest stay was 3 months, the longest could be a couple of years. It really depended entirely on our patients and what their needs were. So the next little section is just about psychosis, which is something I think we hear a lot about, but maybe hopefully don't necessarily know a lot about, otherwise this slide is going to be useless to you. Just so you all are aware, for the sake of definitions, psychosis is when someone is no longer oriented to reality. So they may be having visual, auditory, or sensory hallucinations. They might have a lot of paranoia or fear, or they might have mistaken beliefs about who they are, where they are, and what's happening around them. So keep that in mind as you answer the couple questions on this poll. Again, I'll give you guys just a few seconds to fill it out. Make sure to read them closely because I did take the time to mix up the trues and falses there to confuse you all. I'm good at that. Okay, looks like almost everyone's responded. I'll give you guys 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the poll is closed. I'll share those results. So the first myth of psychosis is that people with psychosis are dangerous. Congratulations. Once again, most of you look like you're pretty aware of the fact that this isn't true. Now, there are some people with psychosis that can be dangerous, but far more of them are likely to be victims of violence themselves. In fact, recent studies suggest that 1 in 5 people with a psychotic disorder end up becoming victimized at some point in their lives. And from what I've noticed in my time working one-on-one with people with psychosis, a lot of the times when people with psychosis do get violent, it's not just out of nowhere. Something triggers it, and a lot of the times it's something like a mistaken identity or belief. For example, we had one patient who was having a lot of very real hallucinations, and she thought that we were keeping one of her friends trapped outside the unit and hurting them, which obviously wasn't true. But she was trying to escape the unit to go and save her friend. And when we tried to stop her, she attacked us because she thought that she needed to save her friend. You know, it's not like she just decided that she needed to hurt people or was hearing voices telling her to hurt people. Most like auditory hallucinations about harm involve hurting yourself, not hurting other people. So you know, they're far more likely to be victims, and they're far more likely to hurt themselves than they are to hurt you. And a lot of the times too, when they do get violent, like I said, it is perceived to be self-defense. Whatever reality they're in, they perceive us as a threat, and they're just trying to defend themselves. And so a lot of the times, if you're able to get through that to them, even though they're having this psychosis, and help them realize that you're not a threat, they'll calm down and they'll stop, and they won't need like to have any like physical intervention, because they'll slowly start to understand and build up that trust. It's very interesting. At the end of this, if we have time, if you guys want, to be happy to talk more about that, because I think that the patients with psychosis are some of my favorites. They're always fascinating. So the second myth, you guys were wrong on this. This one is that people with psychosis will always have psychosis. This is not true. Brief psychotic disorder is a disorder where someone has a period of psychosis that lasts less than 1 month. And the vast majority of patients that we worked with had this kind of thing. The fascinating thing about brief psychotic disorder is it can be triggered by almost everything. I remember one girl we had, she was this incredibly gifted, incredibly talented student. She was involved in a whole bunch of clubs. She was straight A's, very much an overachiever. And it was around finals time, and she was pushing herself, and stopped sleeping. And after, you know, a couple of days of not getting any sleep, her brain just kind of snapped, and she entered this psychotic state where she was not able to communicate. She wasn't able to understand what was happening. She didn't really know where she was or who she was, and she was just scared. And it was really heartbreaking to see, because, you know, we talk, of course, to the families while kids are being admitted in, and we knew that this girl was incredibly brilliant and had really just pushed herself farther than she should have. And thankfully, while she was there, we were able to get her on a sleeping med. And once she fell asleep, she slept for like 24 hours and woke up pretty much back to normal. She was great and was discharged within a couple of days after that, because that's what her body needed, was sleep. It's not always that simple, unfortunately. You know, sometimes people can, like it can be triggered by outside stress, which takes a lot longer to resolve. Sometimes we don't know what triggers it, and we just kind of have to work with the patient as much as we're able, get them meds if that's what's needed. And a lot of the times they do start coming out of it. And it's very cool to see. And what's really fascinating is not everyone remembers what was going on while they were in psychosis. So they don't really have a lot of memories of that week or of those couple weeks that they were suffering from that. Others do, and it's really interesting to hear their perception of what they've experienced. So people who have psychosis, they will not always have psychosis. Even, you know, schizophrenia and whatnot, where it's really common to have those hallucinations, it can come and flow in waves that'll be stronger or weaker, even if they always have those voices, kind of based on treatment, help, medication, et cetera, all can be used to handle and deal with those different types of psychoses and hallucinations. So we will continue on, because next I think we've got depression, right? Yeah. So depression is another really commonly talked about mental illness. And of course in the world, it is considerably more common to see and be diagnosed with than psychosis. So this next poll is about depression. Same thing, it's just 2 questions. Just use your best instincts and go ahead and make your best guess. I'll give you guys probably 45 seconds like I have in the past. Looks like I'm waiting on a couple more people to respond. If they don't answer in 5 seconds, I'll close the poll. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and close. All right. So these are the results. I'm hoping you guys can see them. You can see them, right? I'm not just talking to air. I'm assuming yes. All right. So you guys are doing good and I'm proud of you. So the first, however, you were wrong about this first one. So this first myth, depression is feeling sad all the time, or the most common symptom of depression is a persistent feeling of sadness. That's not actually true. It sounds like it should be true, but it's not. Depression is actually more often a feeling of emptiness or numbness, not necessarily sadness, which I think is quite fascinating also. Now that's not to say that feelings of sadness don't come into it, because they do, but a lot of the times you're going to see that numbness more often. Negative thoughts also come into play, and so do thoughts of self-harm and even suicide. If you or anyone you know is having thoughts like that, please reach out to trusted adults. Thoughts like that should always, always, always be taken seriously. They should never be dismissed or not considered to be important for whatever reason. One of the most common things that I saw among my patients was, you know, they would be describing depression, and it was like, you're in a place where you know you should be having fun and enjoying yourself, and you just kind of feel blank. And that's really, really, really common. That's really what we see a lot of within depression. So the next one, you guys did get correct. People with depression cannot just choose to be happy. That is true. So the myth is that people with depression can choose. When I was watching the opening ceremonies, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. However, I did have a slight issue with when the CEO of Clearbank talked about choosing to be happy. While that's really great advice for many of us, when someone is struggling with a mental illness, their brain is not functioning properly. That's why it's called a mental illness. So we need to keep that in mind. People that are diagnosed with a mental illness have brains that are chemically imbalanced. Telling someone with depression that they can just choose to be happy is akin to telling someone with 2 broken legs that they can walk if they really want to. That being said, it is possible for people with mental illnesses to improve, but it takes a lot of time, patience, therapy, and potentially medication. That's why I use the analogy of two broken legs, actually, because just like two broken legs, it takes a long time to heal. You have to see doctors regularly. You have to go to therapy, and you have to work and train on yourself. I know people that have sustained like injuries to their limbs and did not go to physical therapy like they were supposed to, and they never regained full use of their limb. Mental illnesses work the same way. If you don't go to therapy and consistently work at it, and if you need to take meds, take those meds, then you're probably not going to be doing so great. It really is just like an illness, and in every way, it's just in your brain. You just can't see it. But speak of meds, that is what our next little section of misconceptions is all about. So this is our next poll. I think it might be, yeah, it's our last poll as well. So I'm going to go ahead and launch it. Same thing, give you guys a few seconds to take your best guess at what is correct and what is not correct, and then I'll tell you what's right. Okay, looks like everyone but 2 people haven't responded. So I'll give them 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll end it. All right, looks good. Proud of you guys. So when you see the results, you guys are correct on both of those, which is wonderful. Mental health medication does not change your personality or turn you into a zombie. While medication does have side effects, the right medication will not change your personality. If anything, the right med will help you feel more like you. So I have ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed with it until I was about 23 years old, which is actually probably a good thing, because when I was younger, I was convinced that this myth was true, and I probably would have refused medication and put myself through a lot more stress than I really needed to put myself through. So it's not a bad thing that I wasn't diagnosed till I was older. By the time I was diagnosed, I'd already been working in psych for a couple of years, and I knew that this wasn't the case. But I was still really, really nervous to start meds for the first time, right up until I started them. And I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever been, I'm sure you have been to like a beach or a pool on a day where it's really, really hot and crowded. And you're swimming in the water and you can hear all these voices, right? People screaming, talking, laughing, all in the background. And then when you dip your head under the water, you suddenly realize how quiet it is. And for me, that's how my meds work for my ADHD. They push all of my noise that's going on in my head all the time out to the background so I can focus on what I want to focus on. Your meds should not change who you are. If anything, they should help you feel like you're at your best all the time, or at the very least, most of the time. If they don't, talk to your doctor. Make sure you're on meds that work. And also, as an aside, give them time to work. Meds for ADHD work differently than a lot of meds for mental illnesses, in that they last only 24 hours in your system and then they're gone. Most mental illness medications take time to be built up in your system. And because of that, people can be taking them for a few days and feel pretty much the same as they always have and think that they're not working when that's not the case. But I will talk about that more in a second because I have a visual to help with that. So the second myth is that if you start taking meds, you will have to stay on them for your whole life. That is not the case. Sometimes people just need it for a little while, especially people that are struggling with depression and anxiety. You always want to talk to your doctor before going off of meds, though. That's very, very, very important. You will see why in a minute. But depending on the disorder, people might need meds their whole lives. And honestly, that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with needing medication. It's no different than needing insulin when you have diabetes or needing antibiotics when you're sick. There shouldn't be any shame or stimuli attached to it. But for some people, their mental illness might be linked to what's specifically happening in their life right now. For example, I know someone whose best friend died, and they were struggling quite a bit with depression for a while after, and they started, medication to help with that. And over time, as they continued to move on with their life and do better, they spoke to their doctor and were weaned off of their depression medication without any incident, which is great, which is why it's important to talk to your doctor. But I also know people who did not have any major trigger, but do have a lot of just overall anxiety that they need to take daily meds for, and will probably need to take that for the rest of their life, and that's okay too. It's just something to help you function. There's no shame in that. So this next slide, that's something going on a little more. This next slide is actually about medication and how it works in your system. And I saw a couple of people asking something in chat. When I'm done with this slide, if there are questions, for some reason I can't see what they are, but if there are questions, I'll be happy to answer them, because this is the final slide on the misconceptions about mental illness. So I've got these A's and B's, and I've got them here for a reason. I'm going back to my initial example of being in a place that you know you're going to enjoy. Let's just say you're like me and introverted, which means you don't like being around lots of people. For me, the library is my happy place. And if I'm going to go to the library, my stimuli, my senses, take in all the different things that I see, hear, taste, touch, smell, whatever. And they send those stimuli to the brain. They get filtered through, and they get sent to activate the different parts of the brain that feel different emotions, and that's how I feel happy. So essentially, the brain wants to take your stimuli from point A to point B. What happens in the brain of someone who's, depressed or mentally ill, in this case, this example is specifically for depression, is their synapses are misfiring. The synapses are what fire off those stimuli. And so instead of getting from point A to point B, they're getting misfired, and they're kind of ending up in the wrong space, a nowhere's land, or a part of the brain that triggers maybe sadness or anxiety, whatever it may be. That's why a lot of the times it's emptiness. That is a really common symptom of depression, because your brain is not sending those synapses properly, not firing properly, so you're not able to feel and process emotions properly. Now, what medication does, what good therapy does, and a healthy lifestyle all work together to do is build up these little metaphorical walls in your brain. So when your synapses start to misfire, they bounce off these walls, and they end up going to where they need to be, and that's how you start feeling stable and healthy. Just like regular walls, these walls that medication is building in your brain take time. It is not an overnight thing. It can take upwards of a month for most mental illness medications to be fully built up in your system. So if you are on a med, or you know someone who's just started a med and they're complaining that they don't feel any different, that's normal. It takes time for those walls to be built. And just like it takes time for them to be built, it also takes time for them to dissolve. So if somebody decides to stop taking their medication without talking to a doctor, and they just wake up one day and they don't take it anymore, they're going to feel fine at first, because those walls are still in place. But over time, without reinforcements, without new medication coming in to keep those walls strong, those walls are going to dissolve, and then they're going to be right back in where they were originally. In fact, a lot of the times, people feel even worse, because now their brain understands and knows what it's like to be mentally balanced and healthy, and wants that back. And so sometimes they might end up, feeling suicidal or something, and ending right back up in the psych hospital. And they'll tell their doctors, I don't know what happened. It's definitely not my meds. I've been off them for weeks, and I felt fine until just yesterday, because those walls were still in place. That's called a half-life, how long a medication lasts in your system without it being reinforced. And it's really, that's why it's so important to take your medication as directed and talk to doctors before coming off of them. And that's also why it's important to not just rely on meds. Medication is great, but it should be only one tool. You need to be working on having good therapy. You need to be having a healthy, more balanced lifestyle, working on that sleep schedule that I talked about earlier. All those things work together to ensure that your brain is balanced and your life is balanced, and they're all extremely important. So I'm going to stop my screen share real quick. So if you guys have any questions about mental health misconceptions, please feel free to ask them now. We've got a little bit of time, so I can take some now, and then I'll move on to the effects of COVID-19 on mental health. So does anyone have any questions for me?
I think someone asked if this will be available, like the presentation is going to be available to them. So would you be able to put this in the Discord for them or no?
Yeah, once like the PowerPoint itself, yeah, I'd be happy to. I know that you guys are going to be putting up the YouTube link as well, correct? It's a bit of a rhetorical question.
Yep, we will be putting up this
Yeah.
recording on YouTube.
Yeah, so there'll be the YouTube recording on YouTube, and if you do want just like a copy of the PowerPoint itself, feel free to just reach out to me via Discord and I can send it to you. So if no one else has any questions, I can keep going. All right, then I will continue. All right, so this next section is about COVID-19 and mental health. So events like Corona can be extremely stressful and cause us to struggle with our mental health regardless of how we feel normally. And that's what I'll be focusing on this section. So ages ago, when the lockdown started, I stumbled on a modified version of this tweet, which reads, "If you don't come out of this quarantine with a new skill, your side hustle started. More knowledge, you never lacked time, you lacked discipline." Just by like a show of hands in the chat or whatever you want to do it, how many of you guys have ever had like a similar thought or mentality throughout your lockdown? I know, yeah, seeing a couple hands raised. Yeah, I know I did. And the funny thing is, like, I knew that was wrong, but it's not fair. And here's why that mentality is not fair. Because I found a corrected version actually before I found the original. And it says, you know, instead of "you never lack time, you lack discipline," it says "you're doing just fine. We're going through a collective traumatic experience. Not everyone has the privilege of turning a pandemic into something fun or productive. Stay healthy." So what people like the man who wrote this original tweet don't realize is that this entire COVID-19 situation is potentially traumatic. It's scary and stressful to not know for sure what's going to happen next. And being put under that much stress puts our bodies in fight or flight mode, which makes it really hard to learn anything or try anything or even focus on stuff that we should be doing because we're constantly kind of wondering what's happening next. We don't feel safe. So whether we acknowledge it or not, the challenges we have all faced due to COVID-19 can be extremely difficult, both mentally and physically. We have new safety policies and measures that can disrupt our daily routines. We've got lockdowns and social distancing that can cause us to feel isolated. The stress of potentially contracting the disease, knowing someone with it, or even knowing someone who has died from it can cause even mentally healthy people to struggle. And any and all of these symptoms can worsen the symptom, or any and all of these incidences can worsen the symptoms of someone with pre-existing mental illnesses, or even trigger mental illness in someone who hadn't previously been diagnosed. Now I'm going to go more in depth about the first two outcomes because those are the universal experiences. Of course, if you or anyone you know is really struggling with your mental health right now, please reach out for help. We're all going through this together. You're not alone in how you feel, and you shouldn't feel dumb or guilty or foolish for feeling the way you do because your emotions are valid. This is a traumatic event, whether we want to acknowledge it as that or not, and it's important to be kind just to yourself throughout it. So when we're thinking about disruptions in routine, which is the more basic of the two concepts, most of us have a daily routine that we follow, either consciously or unconsciously. But when that routine is disrupted, it can disrupt our goals, decrease our productivity, affect healthy sleep schedules, increase procrastination, and increase feelings of stress. I don't know about you guys, but me, especially with my ADHD, routines are one of the things that like keep me on track. And so when our lockdown began, it took a while for me to adjust and to establish a new routine because I was very used to doing the same thing at the same time. And now suddenly a lot of what I used to do all the time was no longer available to me. And it was very difficult. Now I've got a new routine and I'm doing considerably better, but it takes a while to get those new routines established and stick with them. So the second thing I want to go more in depth about is isolation. And I'm sure you guys know what it is, right? It's to cause a person or place to be alone or remain alone apart from other people or places, I guess. Why is isolation bad? There's 1,000 reasons why. These are the big ones. Humans are naturally social creatures and we need connection with each other. Even introverts need connection, and I am an introvert, trust me. But still, we need to have some sort of emotional connection or bond with other people. It's a vital part of human nature. When we feel isolated, it can negatively affect our health, both physically and mentally. So physical effects of isolation include disruptions to our sleep cycles, increased lethargy, and even a decreased immune system, which is not a great thing to be experiencing in the midst of a pandemic. Mental effects include decreased motivation, decreased self-esteem, decline in self-care, and decreased cognitive functioning. Now, decreased cognitive functioning is probably the biggest part of it here, and I have an entire slide specifically about that. Another term for cognitive functioning is simply brain functioning. When our cognitive functioning is disrupted, it disrupts literally every part of what we do and what we think. Specifically, we struggle with sleep quality, emotion control, impulse control, logic and reasoning skills like problem solving, attention span, memory processing and recall, and effective communication. So what can we do to help our cognitive functioning and our mental health during this time? There's a couple different things. The first thing we really want to try to do is stay connected with friends and family however we can. This includes Zoom, online gaming, phone calls, whatever. I will say, and this is so interesting because this is like been really backed up in very recent research, that it's really helpful and important when it comes to feeling connected to see people's faces or at the very least hear the inflection of their voice. Texting is great. God knows I do way more of it than I do phone calls, but it is still can cause us to feel somewhat isolated because we do respond. Our brains respond a lot more to the visual cues that we get from seeing other people's faces, and then the auditory cues that we get from hearing other people's voices. So whenever possible, try to keep that incorporated. We also want to try to establish and stick to a new routine. So that includes waking up and going to bed at the same time and having your day divided into different consistent activities. Part of having a new routine is also having kind of like your life divided up in terms of space. So for example, when this lockdown started, I, like most adults, started working from home. And initially I was working out of my dining room, which was fine, it worked, but I knew that I was not functioning at full productivity capacity because my dining room was not a place devoted specifically for work. So that is, a few weeks in, I ended up converting one of the spare rooms in my house into an office. Now I have a home office. I have it painted with specific colors. I've got my fancy wall behind me so I can feel cool during Zoom calls. And I like to look at it. And so having like a specific space just for work or just for school in your guys' case is hugely helpful, especially because at the end of the day, you can leave that space behind and still have the rest of your home or your space be for different, more fun activities. We also want to use coping skills. This is like the biggest thing. Simple examples of coping skills include exercise, reading, coloring and drawing, journaling, meditation, and even video games and watching TV. Now, unfortunately, sometimes we misuse coping skills in an attempt to ignore or push aside how we're feeling. It's important to take time to process your emotions in a healthy way, not just shoving them aside. So this misusing of coping skills is also known as numbing. It's not a bad thing to give your brain a break from negative feelings, but if you're always trying to ignore them, they're always going to come back, usually when we're trying to fall asleep. It's really important to set aside time when you're feeling up to it to process through your emotions in a healthy way. You can do that by talking to someone, writing about them, even making a list of why you're feeling what you're feeling and what you can do about it. It's important to remember to focus on what you can do instead of what you can't. One of my personal mantras is there is always a choice, and there is. Sometimes the choice isn't easy or it's not what I want, but I still have choices I can make. For example, when this lockdown started, for a minute, I was kind of paralyzed with this thought that like I'm not going to be able to see my friends and family as much as I usually do. And I had to remind myself that that might not be a choice I can make, right? I can't go see them, but I can still stay connected with them in other ways. So I got into the habit whenever I was walking the dog to call one of my grandmothers up and make sure that they were doing well and stay connected with them that way every day. And it was really nice because I was out of the house and exercising, and also helped me connect with some of the people in my life that I care about. So sometimes we have to stop and really look at the problem in order to figure out what choices we have, but we do have a choice. When we focus on what we can't control, we have a tendency to end up in a gloom of negative, overwhelming thoughts that only make us feel worse. When we choose to focus on what we can control, it encourages our brains to problem solve and grow stronger. And of course, remember, your mental health matters. It is important and needs to be taken seriously. Take care of yourself because you matter. And that is the end of my slide, hence the any questions. So do you guys have any questions for me about anything? What it's like to work in a psych ward, anything like that? I get that question a lot. No? Okay. Well, if you guys do have questions later on in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via Discord. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Ask about, okay, so I've got two different questions. I've got one about someone regarding depression and another about physical disabilities. Yes, by all means, ask questions about depression. That's something I'm pretty well versed on. In terms of mental health issues to be triggered by physical disabilities, absolutely. It's actually extremely common. In fact, not even necessarily something as serious as losing a limb. Sometimes it can just be being sick for a long time, and having your brain be in that different state can absolutely trigger depression or other mental illnesses in people. That feeling of helplessness can very much be a trigger. And there's a lot of different things that can be triggers for people. And it's important to remember too that sometimes depression, anxiety, whatever doesn't need a trigger. Sometimes it just happens, which sucks. But you don't need a trigger in order to feel the way you feel or validate the way you feel. But what was the question? Here we go. So they told me it is impossible or unbelievable that someone with depression can also work very hard for 10-hour days. I told them that it's possible and it doesn't mean they have mild depression. And they said they must have mild depression if they are able to work so hard. That's not full disclosure, most of the people that work in psych have different levels of mental illness themselves. Quite a few of my friends that I worked with in a psych hospital also struggled with depression, which is why they worked in psych. Some of them struggled with severe depression or even more severe mental illnesses, and our shifts were 12 hours long. So you can work long, hard hours with depression. You are able to shove those thoughts aside when necessary, or even function on automatic when necessary. That doesn't mean you should, but it is possible. You shouldn't judge someone's level of mental illness or mental health based on their productivity. That's not fair. So I'm seeing another question that says, what do I think the difference is between depression or feeling sad and stressed? It's not so much what I think, so much as what science says. So when it comes to feeling sad or feeling stressed, there is an outside factor that causes that, right? So for stress, for example, there's a dog licking my knee right now. I'll use that as an example. I don't like it when dogs lick me. So that outside factor of having a dog lick my knee causes a reaction in my brain that's not great, right? It's kind of gross. And stress and sadness works the same way. Something else is causing those feelings. Now, when those feelings start lasting longer than they should ordinarily, or when they start getting to be extremely invasive, that's when you want to start thinking about talking to a doctor and getting help. You know, having a lot of grief after losing a friend is totally normal. It is completely expected, but it can also trigger depression because that's a loss. Your brain is struggling to comprehend that kind of loss, and it's important to keep that in mind. So when it comes to diagnosing or looking at, well, does someone have depression or does someone have just sadness or anxiety? A lot of it is how long have they had those symptoms and how invasive are those thoughts or those feelings. If they're feeling sad because they dropped their ice cream cone and their dog ate it, which happens to me a lot, that's understandable. If that incidence of their losing their ice cream cone to their dog is something that causes you to feel very strong negative emotions for a long period of time, that's an indication that something isn't right and that you need to probably get help in some way, shape, or form. And also, by the way, talking to a doctor, getting help does not automatically mean you're going to end up in a psych ward. Most mental illnesses are treated without ever needing inpatient care. So does anyone else have any other questions? Hopefully I answered those 2 or 3 pretty well. Okay, well, it is 5:30 on the dot according to my clock. So thank you guys so much for coming. If you have any questions in the future, like I said, please feel free to reach out and ask. I hope that you guys found this helpful. I had a great time presenting, so hope you all enjoyed it too.
Thank you for joining us, Susanna.
Of course.
Really appreciate it. Just so everyone knows, this is going to be available on YouTube and within like the next 30 minutes. So if there's something that you missed or want to go back, feel free to go back then. We'll send a link out on Discord. But thank you so much, Susanna. This is definitely like very interesting to listen to. And we really appreciate you being here all the way from Michigan, which is so cool.
I'm so glad to hear it. I really enjoyed it. I'm very glad to be a part of it. And I hope you guys have a great day and a great rest of your weekend.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.